Everybody, on behalf of the UBS Center for Economics in Society, I would like to welcome you to today's lecture. A warm welcome also to those who are joining us in the broadcasting room and via live stream. My name is Ernst Fehr. I'm a professor of economics here at the University of Zurich, and I'm the director of the UBS Center for Economics in Society, an associated institute of the Department of Economics. I'm very pleased that so many of you have joined us this evening, because it's one of the UBS Center's main objectives to serve as a platform for dialogue between academia, politics, and the broader public. Today's public lecture is part of an event series on the important topic of democracies under threat. Only 2 weeks ago, we had Wolfgang Schäuble, the former finance minister of Germany, in this room, where he spoke on the future of liberal democracy. While Wolfgang Schäuble raised many concerns about the current developments around the globe, especially regarding the situation in Ukraine and Israel, he was and is nevertheless confident and hopeful about the future. I found this personally quite remarkable, the optimism he could convey to us despite the current crisis. One of his statements was, well, the crisis is produced by people, and so it can also be overcome by people. And that is the perfect lead-in to today's speaker, Steven Pinker. It is truly an honor and a privilege to introduce Steven Pinker to you. Steven is a renowned scholar, a brilliant thinker, and a compelling author. He has made significant contributions to our understanding of language, the mind, and human behavior. Steven teaches and conducts research at Harvard University, where he is professor at the Department of Psychology. His work has had a profound impact in the field of cognitive psychology, linguistics, and the science of human nature. He is considered one of the foremost cognitive scientists of our time. But Steven's influence extends far beyond the academic world. He is also a prolific writer with several best-selling books, including titles such as How the Mind Works, The Blank Slate, Enlightenment Now, or Rationality, about which he is talking today. They have not only been critically acclaimed, but also have reached a broad audience, making complex ideas accessible to many people. Steven's ability to communicate difficult concepts with clarity and enthusiasm has earned him a dedicated following around the globe. Steven is therefore, in my view, also one of the world's most important and most influential public intellectuals. In 2004, Time magazine therefore named him one of the 100 most influential scientists and thinkers. In addition to his academic and literary achievements, Steven is also known for his deep commitment to promoting reason, rationality, and the scientific method. He is an advocate for the power of knowledge and the importance of making use of it, and making use of it to make the world a better place. His fact-based confidence about the potential for human progress is both inspiring and contagious. In a recent interview with the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung NZZ am Sonntag, Steven explained why he maintains his confidence in human progress and reason. The answer lies in trusting rationality and adherence to facts, because the facts, when viewed over a longer time horizon, impressively show that the human species has made enormous progress. For example, in 2023, most people live longer, have better health, are better educated, enjoy more leisure time than 100 years ago. But of course, we do not live in paradise. The world is, for example, also riddled with local and regional conflicts, and as recent events illustrate, with atrocities. However, when viewed over a longer time horizon, and I cannot emphasize enough, when viewed over a longer time horizon, this is the crucial thing. You don't just look in this episode and this episode of the time and this episode. You take everything into account. Then the world has become a better place, despite temporary setbacks. We are fortunate to have Steven Pinker with us today to share his insights on the human mind, society, and the future of humanity. His ideas have the potential to challenge our preconceptions and to inspire us to think more critically about the world we live in. Now, before we start, here is some technical information. During the presentation, you can already submit questions online. And I think here you see the number on Menticom. Please go on the website Menticom. You can take your mobile phone and go there, or your desktop, and dial in with this code you see here on the screen. On this platform, you can ask questions for our Q&A after Stephen's talk. This will take place at the end. You can also vote on other questions. You can support, so to speak, that we prioritize some questions over others. So you can take use of that. And now, after this, Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ernst, for that very kind introduction. Thanks to all of you for coming this evening. Human rationality presents a puzzle. On the one hand, our species can claim stupendous feats of rationality. However, my slide is not advancing. Let's see. What am I doing wrong here? Pointed to, no? Wait. There we go. Pointed this way? Slightly. Very good. Okay. As I was saying, human rationality presents us with a puzzle. On the one hand, our species has achieved astonishing feats of rationality. We have no? That is it? Okay, but what about should I stand over here? It should work, but it's not working. This is a fine thing for a talk on rationality, that we are having trouble getting the basic cause and effect of a clicker to work. No? Do we need new batteries here? No? No? Yeah, that's, what if that doesn't help either. Is there another clicker? No. And we don't know what the problem is. Okay. Try this one? Okay. No luck? No luck. You had it working?
You have to press here.
Yes, that's right. That's what I was doing. Yes. What were you doing differently? Okay. Do I have to hold it down? As long as this works, we're okay. Yeah. Wait. Maybe I'll stand here closer. Okay. Thank you for your patience. So our species has walked on the moon, taken pictures of our home planet, has explored the origin of the universe, the structure of life, the basis of thought. At the same time, no, we've got a problem here. There, oops, here we go. Okay, we have pushed back at the four horsemen of the apocalypse, reducing the toll of suffering from war, famine, poverty, and child mortality. At the same time, a majority of Americans aged 18 to 24 think that astrology is very or sort of scientific. Large proportions believe in conspiracy theories, like that COVID-19 vaccines are actually microchips that Bill Gates is trying to inject in us so that he can surveil us, or that the American government is infested by a conspiracy of cannibalistic, satanic, pedophilic Satan worshippers. Many people subscribe to fake news, like Yoko Ono, I had an affair with Hillary Clinton in the 1970s. And large percentages subscribe to various forms of paranormal woo-woo, such as possession by the devil, extrasensory perception, ghosts and spirits, witches, and spiritual energy in mountains, trees, and crystals. So how do we make sense of human rationality? That is the puzzle that I took on in my book, Rationality. What it is, why it seems scarce, why it matters. So let's begin with the first part of the subtitle, what is rationality? I define it as the use of knowledge to attain goals. And my favorite characterization comes from the American psychologist and philosopher William James. He is the namesake of the building that I work at in Harvard University. And he tried to characterize the difference between a clearly rational agent and a superficially similar physical object that we would not call rational. And here's how he characterizes the difference. Romeo wants Juliet as the filings want the magnet, and if no obstacles intervene, he moves toward her by as straight a path as they. But Romeo and Juliet, if a wall be built between them, do not remain idiotically pressing their faces against the opposite sides like the magnet and filings with a card. Romeo soon finds a circuitous way by scaling the wall or otherwise of touching Juliet's lips directly. With the filings, the path is fixed. Whether it reaches the end depends on accidents. With the lover, it is the end which is fixed. The path may be modified indefinitely. That is rationality. Well, it raises the question of how knowledge can be used to attain goals. Can we do it so that you just watch my thumb and every time I go like this, you click it? Thank you. And the general answer comes from what we may call normative models. These are models that indicate how one ought to reason if one was an optimal decision maker. How to avoid each rational normative model also introduces a common fallacies that human beings are prone to making. Got to be quicker, please. And I believe that every educated person should command the set of normative models that I will quickly run through now. And that was a major focus of my book, Rationality, to share these 7 cognitive tools or normative models of how one should reason, how one ought to reason. The most basic is logic, which satisfies the goal of deducing new propositions from existing ones, helping us avoid fallacies such as affirming the consequent, as in, every creative genius was laughed at in his time, people laugh at my ideas, therefore I'm a creative genius. Thank you. Probability. The likelihood of an event depends on the number of occurrences as a proportion of the number of opportunities. An appreciation of that helps us avoid fallacies like the availability bias, in which the subjective likelihood of an event depends on how easily you can recall anecdotes and images. As in the following cartoon, the caption is, "This is why people should learn statistics. I will not fly in a plane. They aren't safe from terrorists. Hold on, I'll text you an article about it." Bayes' rule. We should give credence to a hypothesis to the extent that it's credible a priori, it's consistent with the evidence, and the evidence is uncommon across the board. That's Bayes' rule in language rather than mathematics. And that helps us avoid fallacies like the following: base rate neglect. A doctor says to a woman, "Your child has a nervous twitch, so she probably has Tourette syndrome," forgetting about the fact that there are many ways in which a child can have nervous twitches, and that the proportion of people with base rate in the population is very low. So just having a twitch probably means that she does not have Tourette syndrome. The theory of rational choice or expected utility. A rational actor chooses the option with the greatest expected utility, that is the probability times the payoff, helping us avoid fallacies like buying extended warranties. A large percentage of consumers, when they buy a product, will pay an additional 25% for a warranty that will replace it if it breaks. Now, if you think about the probability that a device will break, the cost of just replacing it, compared to the cost of the extended warranty, you might think, does it really make sense for me to take out a life insurance policy on my toaster? Or a more consequential example, if you figured out the pleasure that it gave you in getting a text or a social media post a few minutes early by texting while driving, compared to the cost, even at a small probability that you place on your life, it's not so clear that that many people would text while they drive, although many people do. The theory of signal detection, also called statistical decision theory. A fallible observer cannot know whether an observation is real, namely a signal, or bogus, namely noise, and must set a decision cutoff that trades off misses and false alarms according to their costs, which can help us avoid fallacies like the following. We should deal with misconduct by making it easier to convict the accused. Well, that will result in more guilty people being punished. It will also result in more innocent people being punished, unless one can increase the signal-to-noise ratio and distinguish the guilty from the innocent, as opposed to merely convicting more people across the board. Game theory. How to make rational choices when the payoffs depend on someone else's rational choices. Avoid fallacies like, we can avoid climate change if we just convince, back please, if we just convince everyone that it's in their interest to conserve. Back, please. The problem being, since no one wants to live in a dangerously hot world, the fallacy is that if you conserve, it is actually not in your interests, because you will suffer the consequences of being colder in the winter, hotter in the summer, standing in the rain waiting for a bus while everyone else drives, not unless everyone makes a conservation sacrifice at the same time would anyone benefit, because if you are the only one, then you suffer all the costs, but it doesn't actually save the climate unless everyone else does it simultaneously. And the theory of causal inference. To distinguish causation from correlation, one must manipulate the putative cause, holding all else constant, helping us to avoid fallacies like failing to rule out confounds, as illustrated in an old Jewish joke. A couple approaches a rabbi because the wife is sexually unsatisfied. And it is part of Jewish law that the husband is responsible for his wife's sexual pleasure. The rabbi strokes his beard and he says, well, here's something you can try. Hire a young, athletic, handsome man to wave a towel over you the next time you make love, and the fantasies will help your wife achieve satisfaction. So they try it, and they hire a young, handsome man, and he waves the towel, and nothing happens. The earth doesn't move. So they go back to the rabbi. The rabbi strokes his beard, and he says, well, this time we'll try a slight variation. This time, the husband, you wave the towel, and we'll have the young man make love to the wife. And sure enough, she experiences an ecstatic, screaming orgasm. And the husband says to the young man, schmuck, now that's how you wave a towel. So that's an example of failing to rule out a confound. Well, now this raises a question for a psychologist. Do people follow normative models of rationality? Let me give you an example from logic. And this has been tried in psychology labs now for almost 60 years. The results are highly replicable. So imagine a deck of cards where every card has a number on one side and a letter on the other. And you're tasked with testing the following rule. If a card has a D on one side, then it has a 3 on the other. Here are the cards. You have a D, an F, a 3, and a 7. Which cards do you have to turn over to test the rule? Okay, why don't you think by yourself for a minute? Okay. The most popular answer is that you have to turn over the D card or the D card and the 3 card. The correct answer is you have to turn over the D card and the 7 card. If you think about it, everyone knows you have to turn over the D card, because if you turn it over and there isn't a 3 on the other side, the rule is falsified. Everyone knows you don't have to turn over the F card, because the rule says if D, then 3. Now, many people think you have to turn over the 3 card, but when you think twice, you realize that's irrelevant, because the rule says if D, then 3, not if 3, then D. And if you think about it, you really do have to turn over the 7 card, because if you turn it over and there's a D on the other side, that falsifies the rule. This is commonly explained as a case of confirmation bias, that people seek evidence that confirms their hypotheses, not that falsifies them. Let me give you another example. That was from logic. This time I'll give you an example from Bayesian inference, applying Bayes' rule. The probability that a woman has breast cancer is 1%. If a woman has breast cancer, the probability that she tests positive is 90%. If a woman does not have breast cancer, the probability that she nevertheless tests positive is 9%. That's the false positive or false alarm rate. A woman tests positive, what is the chance that she actually has breast cancer? The most popular answer among doctors in fact, among everyone, is 80 to 90%. The correct answer is 9%. Where do people go wrong? Well, they don't take into account the fact that if the proportion in the population is low, 1%, then most of the positives are going to be false positives. Commonly explained as by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, pioneers in this area, as base rate neglect, namely that people tend to ignore the priors, that is the proportion in the population, and they base judgments on representative stereotypes. A person with cancer will test positive, but they don't take into account how common or rare it is in the population. So what do these fallacies show? Well, one interpretation from Mr. Spock is that humans are irrational, but not so fast. Here's a variation in the logic problem. If a bar patron is drinking beer, he must be over 21. You are a bouncer in a bar, and you have to enforce the rule. Which of the following people do you have to check? There's a guy drinking beer. Do you have to check his identification card to see how old he is? There's a guy who's drinking Coke. Do you have to check his identification card to see how old he is? There is a guy who is clearly over 21. Do you have to look into his cup to see what he's drinking? There is a guy who's under 21. Do you have to look into his cup to see what he's drinking? Well, in this case, virtually everyone gets the right answer. You have to check the age of the person drinking beer. You've got to check the beverage of the person who's under 21. But this is logically identical to the if D, then 3 card selection problem. Often called the content effect, namely that people are illogical with abstract symbols, with P's and Q's and X's and Y's and D's and 3's, but they can be logical with certain kinds of meaningful content, such as obligations in social contracts or precautions. Here's a twist on the probability problem. 10 in every 1,000 women have breast cancer. Of these 10 women, 9 will test positive. Of the 990 women without breast cancer, about 89 will nevertheless test positive. A woman tests positive, what is the chance that she actually has breast cancer? Well, now people can think 98 test positive overall. 9 of those have cancer. 9 out of 98 is 9%. Now, a majority of doctors get the answer correct, and even a majority of 10-year-olds get the answer correct. The common explanation is that there is a big psychological difference between natural frequencies, that is, proportion of events that fall on one side or another, versus single event probabilities, the probability that that person has cancer. Because when you think about it, the concept of the probability of a single event is a little bit problematic. Either she does have cancer or she doesn't have cancer. What does it mean to say the probability that she has cancer? And when it comes to proportions, people can think statistically. It's when they have to deal with the strange concept of the probability of a single event that they fall back on stereotypes. So a better conclusion about human rationality is that people engage in ecological rationality. This has nothing to do with hugging a tree or going green. Ecological in the sense of operating in a natural environment. People can reason about content relative to their lives, mixed in with their subject matter knowledge. And they can estimate probabilities as they encounter sequences of events in their lives. People have much more trouble with formal rationality. That is, general purpose rules that operate on abstract symbols and formulas that can apply to any content. These are extraordinarily powerful because you don't have to be familiar with the subject matter, but they are inventions of hundreds or thousands of years of mathematicians and logicians and scientists. These must be learned and consciously deployed. Well, this leads to the question that people are really interested in when it comes to rationality, namely, if people can be rational, why does humanity seem to be losing its mind? And this is the question that I always get asked when I say, I'm teaching a course in rationality, I'm writing a book on rationality. People don't really care about Bayes' rule or signal detection theory or correlation and causation. They want to know, why do people believe in conspiracy theories and paranormal woo-woo and quack cures? It's not an easy question to answer, and I think there are at least 4 reasons. The first, and probably the biggest, is motivated reasoning. Now, when I defined rationality, I said it's always in pursuit of a goal. But that goal is not necessarily the pursuit of abstract truth. It can also be to win an argument in which the stakes matter to you. As the American journalist Upton Sinclair said, it's very hard to get a man to understand something when his livelihood depends on not understanding it. It can also be to show how wise and moral your group is, your religion, your tribe, your political sect, and how stupid and evil the opposite one is, in which case it's called the my side bias, which is probably the most powerful of the 200 or so cognitive biases that have been documented by psychologists, and is one of the few biases that is completely uncorrelated with intelligence. You can be very smart and figure out ways to show why your side is right. Let me give you an example. Is this syllogism valid? Namely, does the conclusion follow logically from the premises? And I apologize, it's a very American example. If college admissions are fair, then affirmative action laws are no longer necessary. Affirmative action laws are those that give preference to minority groups. College admissions are not fair, therefore, affirmative action laws are necessary. Now, it turns out this is not a valid syllogism. It is an example of denying the antecedent. P implies Q, not P, therefore not Q. That is not valid. When you give this example to people, people who are on the left, who are American liberals, commit the fallacy. Conservatives don't. Now, if you ask conservatives for an explanation, they'll say, well, of course, we told you all along, liberals are irrational. Not so fast. How about this syllogism? If less severe punishments deter people from committing crime, then capital punishment should not be used. Again, this is an American example for which I apologize. Less severe punishments do not deter people from committing crime. Therefore, capital punishment should be used. Well, this is also a fallacy, also denying the antecedent, but this time a majority of conservatives commit the fallacy, and now the liberals are the logicians. Of course, what's happening in both cases is that people always think that whatever they believed all along is logically warranted, and so they will misinterpret the logic problem in terms of the belief that they want to be true. A second part of the explanation for why people believe in strange things comes in the form of deeply rooted folk intuitions. These are ways of thinking that were probably wired into us by the process of evolution that worked pretty well in the natural environment in which we evolved, but have been superseded by better scientific knowledge. For example, there is the intuition of dualism, that a person has a body and a person has a mind, 2 things. Now, when we deal with each other, we don't treat each other as pieces of meat, as robots, as dolls. We assume that there is a mind. We can't see their mind, but we assume they have them, a locus of beliefs and desires. Well, from there, it's a short step to imagine that there can be minds without bodies. And so you get beliefs in spirits and souls and ghosts and an afterlife and reincarnation and ESP. Another deeply rooted intuition is essentialism. The idea that living things contain some kind of invisible essence or stuff that gives them their form and powers. Well, from there, it's a short step to believe that disease is caused by some kind of adulteration of one's pure essence by a foreign contaminant. And so you have resistance to vaccines, which is as old as vaccines themselves, and resistance to genetically modified organisms, which are perfectly safe, but which people think are somehow icky or contaminated. When you think about a vaccine, what is it? You're taking the actual agent that causes a disease and you're injecting it into your own flesh. It's not surprising that many people would find that very unappetizing. In the other direction, you have receptivity to homeopathy and herbal remedies, which seem to be transferring the pure, healthful essence of some living thing into the body. And you also have, in many cultures, the reinvention of quack cures like purging and bloodletting and fasting and getting rid of toxins, as if you could cure someone by somehow squeezing or expelling the contaminant out of their body. And a third intuition is teleology. Now, we know that our own plans and our own tools and artifacts are designed with a purpose. Well, from there, it's a short step to assume that the universe is designed with a purpose. And so you get beliefs in creationism and astrology and synchronicity, in the vague sense that everything happens for a reason. Now, the third part of the explanation is that these folk intuitions are unlearned and objective truths are acquired only by trusting legitimate expertise. Scientists, historians, journalists, government record keepers, economists. Few of us have enough expertise to judge the validity of knowledge for ourselves. Including our true beliefs. So if you were to ask me how vaccines work, I say, they're antibodies, immune system. I couldn't really give you a very good explanation, but I just trust the people in the white coats who say that it works. And indeed, surveys of people who deny scientific truths, like creationists or deniers in human-made climate change, show they are not scientifically ignorant. On tests of scientific literacy, they do as well as people who believe in evolution or climate change. The only difference is political ideology. The farther to the right, the more you deny evolution and climate change. Weird beliefs persist in people who don't trust the establishment, who think that scientists and journalists and government record keepers are just some other priesthood that have their own set of beliefs. Finally, there is a distinction in the kind of belief that people have. When you ask the question, why do people believe outlandish fake news and conspiracy theories? The answer is, it depends what you mean by believe. People have two kinds of beliefs. There's beliefs in what I call the reality zone. This is comprises the physical objects around us, the other people we deal with face to face, the memory of their interactions. Beliefs in this zone are testable, and people hold them if they are true. They have to. Reality is unforgiving, and it's the only way that you can keep petrol in the car and food in the refrigerator and the children fed and clothed and off to school on time. But then there's what I call the mythology zone. This comprises the distant past, the unknowable future, faraway people and places, remote corridors of power, the microscopic, the cosmic, the counterfactual, the metaphysical. Here, people hold beliefs because they are entertaining, they're uplifting, they're empowering, they're morally edifying. For most of our history, there was no way you could answer these questions, and so you may as well hold the beliefs that are of the greatest moral virtue. Whether they are true or false is unknowable and irrelevant. Examples include religion, which almost by definition, religious beliefs are held by faith rather than evidence. The myths about the great heroes and martyrs that founded our noble nation. Historical fiction. Does anyone really care whether Henry V said those stirring words that Shakespeare put in his mouth? And fake news and conspiracy theories, I think. It is, don't you think it's sometimes strange that people who say they believe in an all-powerful, ruthless, oppressive government conspiracy will actually talk about it out in the open, have meetings, distribute their pamphlets? Why aren't they worried that they'll be thrown in jail or executed? It is really believe these propositions. An example would be the belief in the conspiracy theory known as Pizzagate. This was an American phenomenon where it was a predecessor of the bigger conspiracy called QAnon, where there was a rumor that Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring out of the basement of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., called the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria. Well, what did people who held this belief do about it? Well, an example is one of them gave a 1-star review on Google, and he's been giving funny looks to my 4-year-old son. Now, this is not the kind of reaction that you would have if you literally thought that children were being raped in the basement. Presumably, you would call the police. So what does it mean to say that Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring? You can translate that really as, I believe Hillary Clinton is so depraved that she's capable of running a child sex ring. Or I think still more accurate translation would be, Hillary, boo. In other words, beliefs can be expressions of moral convictions. So when Bertrand Russell said, it is undesirable to believe a proposition when there is no ground whatsoever for supposing it is true, if you think that this is obvious, who has to say that, then you are the unusual person. You are a child of the Enlightenment, because for most people in most of history, for beliefs in the mythology zone, there's no way to know whether it is true, and you believe it in order to make a moral commitment, an expression of your values. It raises the question, how can we become more rational? Well, to start with, I think the tools of formal rationality, the normative model, should become second nature. That rationality should be the fourth R together with reading, writing, and arithmetic. As in this satirical, humorous headline from an American human magazine, The Onion, Center for Disease Control announces plan to send every U.S. household pamphlet on probabilistic thinking. But it isn't enough to teach things in school, because those of us who are professors know, sadly, that most students forget most of what they are taught as soon as the ink is dry on the final exam. So these norms should be just part of everyone's conventional wisdom, everyone's common knowledge. Avoidance of fallacies like the availability bias, the my side bias, arguing ad hominem, that is to the person rather than to the idea, should be promoted. Everyone should know these are fallacies. Basing beliefs on evidence and changing your mind when the evidence changes should be seen as signs of strength, not weakness. But probably more important, since it can't be left up to every individual or even groups of individuals, institutions with their rationality-promoting rules must be safeguarded. In a group of people exchanging ideas, one person can notice and make up for another person's biases. For example, in the these can make us collectively more rational than any of us is individually. For example, remember the card selection task, if D, then 3. And remember that I said that when people are given this problem to solve individually, about 1 in 10 get it right. But if you have people working in groups, then 7 in 10 get it right. All it takes is for one person to notice the correct answer and explain it to the others, and they almost always see the light and fall in line. What do I mean by rationality-promoting institutions? Science would be the paradigm example with a demand for empirical testing and peer review. Democratic government with its checks and balances. Journalism with its demand for editing and fact-checking. The judicial system with its adversarial proceedings, defense and prosecution. Academia with its commitment, at least in theory, to freedom of inquiry and open debate. And even Wikipedia, which is not perfect, but it is surprisingly reliable, and that's because the editors have a commitment to neutrality and objectivity, and there is the mechanism where one person can correct another person's statements or edits. You can compare this unfavorably with other electronic media, such as social media like X and Facebook, which do not have safeguards and a commitment to truth, and we all know the result of those experiments. It also means that the credibility and objectivity of our rationality-promoting institutions must be safeguarded. The experts should be prepared to show their work instead of making pronouncements as if they were oracles or priests. Fallibility should be acknowledged. We all start out ignorant of everything, and we can only understand things as evidence comes in. And gratuitous politicization should be avoided. And this is a way in which our major scientific institutions and many of our journalistic institutions are going in the wrong direction. They are flagrantly and explicitly branding themselves as being on the political left. They should not be surprised if a majority of people who are in the center and the right and a majority of leaders and politicians ignore them or blow them off. Finally, why rationality matters. Rationality matters to our lives. People who follow normative models and avoid cognitive fallacies, on average, get into fewer accidents and have fewer mishaps in their lives, have better financial, health, and employment outcomes, and are less likely to be swindled by medical or psychic charlatans. Rationality drives material progress. In my previous book, Enlightenment Now, I presented data that showed that longevity, peace, prosperity, safety, and quality of life have all, on average, increased over time. This leads to a frequently asked question, do I believe in progress? The answer is really no. I like to quote the humorist Fran Lebowitz, who said, I don't believe in anything you have to believe in. There is no force in the universe that just carries us ever upward. On the contrary, the forces of nature kind of grind us down. the only way that we've achieved progress is by rationality, by deploying reason with the goal of improving human flourishing. Less obviously, I'm prepared to argue that rationality drives moral progress. In an earlier book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, I showed that on every scale, from world wars to the spanking of children, rates of violence have gradually come down over time. And when I tried to identify the causes, because this doesn't happen just by itself, I was surprised to find that many moral movements began with a rational argument. That is, a philosopher or an activist or a spiritual leader would articulate an argument as to why some practice of the day was immoral or unethical or inconsistent with other values that people of the time claimed to hold. The argument would be published in a pamphlet. It would be translated into other languages. It would, as we say today, go viral. It would be discussed in pubs and salons and bars and coffee houses. It would eventually influence decision makers and become put into practice, leading people to forget that an argument had to be framed in the first place. Let me give you some examples. Religious persecution. Now, I'm going to be going through a number of quotations, so I'm going to have to ask you to stay with me and to be very quick in presenting the lines of text. Did people really need an argument as to why something might be wrong with burning heretics at the stake? Something which I believe took place here in Zurich, and your countryman John Calvin was one of the main perpetrators. But the argument was made. It was made, among others, by Sebastian Castellio, who pointed out, Calvin says that he is certain, and other sects say they are. Who shall be judge? In view of the uncertainty, we must define the heretic simply as one with whom we disagree. And if then we are going to kill heretics, the result will be, the logical outcome will be a war of extermination, since each is sure of himself. The logical outcome. Castellio was pointing out the my side bias, hundreds of years before psychologists named it. What about forms of cruel capital and corporal punishment, like breaking on the wheel, or disembowelment, or crucifixion? Here, too, there was an argument as to why this was inconsistent with values that people held. It was made, among others, by Cesare Beccaria, the Italian economist and social scientist, who said, as punishments become more cruel, the minds of men, which like fluids always adjust to the level of the objects that surround them, become hardened. And after 100 years of cruel punishments, breaking on the wheel causes no more fear than imprisonment previously did. For a punishment to achieve its effects, it is only necessary that the harm it inflicts outweighs the benefit that derives from the crime, and into this calculation ought to be factored the certainty of punishment and the loss of the good that the commission of the crime would produce. Everything beyond this is superfluous and therefore tyrannical. In other words, Beccaria anticipated the theory of rational choice or expected utility, which was only mathematically proposed by von Neumann and Morgenstern 200 years later, but he had the idea. What about war? Did people need an argument that something might be wrong with war? Well, they did, and it goes back at least to Erasmus, who noted, the advantages derived from peace diffuse themselves far and wide and reach great numbers, while in war, if anything turns out happily, the advantage redounds only to a few. One man's safety is owing to the destruction of another. One man's prize is derived from the plunder of another. The cause of rejoicings made by one side is to the other a cause of mourning. Whatever is unfortunate in war is severely so indeed, and whatever, on the contrary, is called good fortune is a savage and a cruel good fortune, an ungenerous happiness deriving its existence from another's woe. This is a anticipation of what we would today call a zero-sum conflict, and Erasmus used it to argue against war half a millennium ago. What about autocracy, such as the divine rule of kings? Well, John Locke famously argued that we are born free as we are born rational. Freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and made by the legislative power erected in it. A liberty to follow my own will in all things where that rule prescribes not to be subject to the inconstant, uncertain, unknown, arbitrary will of another man, as freedom of nature is to be under no other restraint but the law of nature. Now, it's perhaps unsurprising that this led 100 years later to the establishment of the first democracies. Less obvious is that it led to another kind of moral progress. When Mary Astell, one of the first feminists, wrote, "If absolute sovereignty be not necessary in a state, how comes it to be necessary in a family? Or, if in a family, why not in a state, since no reason can be alleged for the one that will not hold more strongly for the other? If all men are born free, how is it that all women are born slaves? As they must be, if the being subjected to the inconstant, uncertain, unknown, arbitrary will of men, sound familiar, be the perfect condition of slavery." In other words, holding people to logical consistency based on their commitment to democracy. And speaking of slavery itself, it may seem monstrous that anyone would need a rational argument as to why this most evil institution had to be abolished, but such an argument was produced by the great orator Frederick Douglass, who pointed out, among many other things, there are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? The manhood of the slave is conceded. It is admitted in the fact that the Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. Again, logical consistency. I argue that not only has reason historically guided movements for change, but it should guide movements for change. Because reason makes the difference between moral force and brute force, between marches for justice and lynch mobs, between human progress and breaking things. And reason will be needed to ensure that moral progress will continue, that our descendants will look back at some of the barbaric practices that we take part in now with as much incredulity as we look back on slave auctions and heretic burning today. Finally, I close the book by suggesting that the power of rationality to guide moral progress is of a piece with its power to guide material progress and wise choices in our lives. I will read to you the last words of the book. Our ability to eke increments of well-being out of a pitiless world and to be good to others despite our flawed nature depends on grasping impartial principles that transcend our parochial experience. We are a species that has been endowed with an elementary faculty of reason and that has discovered formulas and institutions that magnify its scope. They awaken us to ideas and and expose us to realities that confound our intuitions, but are true for all that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Ernst.
This was a particular challenge because you were not in control of the pointer and the moving forward machine. And so it is pretty hard to give a talk under these conditions. But you did, and it was very enlightening. Now, we go to the questions and answers session. There have already been many questions posted in the online, and let us sit down here. Let me take the privilege to ask the first question. You said reason should guide movements to change. Now, but there are many movements that are based on emotion rather than reason, and they also generate change, and sometimes for the positive, not always for the positive. So there is a tension between having reason in these movements and making real progress, because reason doesn't always mobilize the people. You know, that's why the political leaders resort to other means. What's your assessment of this tension?
And so, it is true that just a rational argument of the type that I outlined are not sufficient. I don't think that Beccaria and Erasmus and Castellio marched with signs or delivered rousing speeches to big crowds. But the people who did give those speeches read Beccaria and Erasmus and Castellio, and they were influenced. And many of the effective leaders for social change also made good arguments. Martin Luther King was an intellectual, and Gandhi and Mandela. They gave reasons for what they were doing, and they were charismatic individuals. And I think the gift of effective and justifiable social action is to either have a team, or sometimes they can be combined in one person, where the reasons can be articulated, but also the emotion of empathy, of carefully controlled crowd enthusiasm, which can be very, very dangerous and terrifying and destructive. But when it's mobilized and married to a cause that can be defended and articulated, that's when you can get positive social change. I think one of the indicators is, do dissenters get punished or killed? In many of the destructive social movements, I think tellingly, the arguments were not allowed to prevail because those who pointed out flaws, who disagreed with them, were repressed. And that's one of the reasons why freedom of speech tends to go with truly progressive movements. They're not afraid of people disagreeing because they can argue that they're right and the people who disagree are wrong.
Okay, so the problem is that in the popularity ratings that I have on the questions move up and down, and sometimes I want to ask a question and it's no longer visible because it has been outvoted. But now I have found it again. So what do you think about John Haidt's view that rational deliberation rarely affects people's own and other people's intuition-based moral judgments?
Yeah, I think it's, I have a huge admiration for Jonathan Haidt, for all of his writings. I think this is a bit of an exaggeration, and it has been shown that people, not always, not instinctively, but people can change their minds, and we know that social change happens. Just an example in the United States recently, when just 8 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage was legal in all 50 states. Now, this was something that people had an instinctive gut reaction against, probably a majority of Americans. But when the argument was made, there is no harm, there's benefit, it's a matter of fairness, people couldn't argue back. If they said, well, God says that homosexuality is a sin, not enough people believe literally in the in the infallibility of Scripture to take that seriously. And the whole country flipped remarkably quickly. And there are examples in the lab where if you give people very good arguments, they don't always change their mind, but often they can change their mind. Now, granted, I think Haidt does make an important point that our first reaction is definitely emotional. Does some practice just give us the creeps? Is it what people I like and respect believe? But maybe a resolution is that the effective rational arguments of the kind that I reproduced from Castellio and Beccaria and Locke and Astel start a process of social contagion where some people are convinced by them, they then convince others. Then when it starts to feel like everyone believes it, then that gets incorporated into your emotional reaction, and it's much easier to go along with the rationally justifiable position.
Okay, somebody else asks here, we have been trying to solve climate change by deploying rationality for more than 30 years. It didn't work. How should we face collective action problems?
Yes. I would disagree that we've applied rationality. There's been an awful lot of gut feeling and emotion and virtue signaling and symbolic sacrifices that just where people haven't done the math. There have been a lot of the primitive intuitions of essentialism, probably most conspicuously in the case of nuclear power, which goes against our essentialist intuition that there is pure biological functioning, and then there's this poisonous radiation, there's this poisonous substance of uranium. We can't have that. Many energy experts who have calculated the environmental costs and benefits of nuclear power versus alternatives like coal have pointed out that we could have made much more progress on greenhouse gas emissions if nuclear plants had not been shut down, prohibited, and that we're going to need much more of it to close the gap of bringing emissions down to zero. More generally, but the questioner is correct in noting that part of the rationality is the game theory of the collective action problem. Namely, often, and one of the main lessons of game theory, one of the reasons that I have a chapter on it, not a mathematical chapter, but a verbal, qualitative chapter explaining it, is that one of the main lessons of game theory is that every individual pursuing his or her self-interest rationally can lead to an outcome that is irrational for the entire group. There are many examples, such as the prisoner's dilemma, the tragedy of the commons. It's rational for every shepherd to bring his sheep onto the town commons to graze, but if everyone does it and the grass is grazed faster than it can grow back, it's irrational for the entire community of shepherds. Likewise, it's rational for everyone to drive a car, to have a oil-burning furnace, not rational when the whole planet does it. And that does change the way we think of climate change as a problem. That is switching from individual rationality to game theoretic rationality, that is what works for all of the players acting, each one of them anticipating what the other one does. And the two, I think, solutions or potential solutions that work, one of them is the one that almost every economist believes in, but politicians try it and it doesn't work so well, and that is carbon pricing. That is, if you put a price on carbon, that changes the payoff matrix, and then the greener choice becomes the cheaper choice. The problem is that people hate carbon taxes, and if you impose a carbon tax, then they put on yellow vests and they set cars on fire, as Emmanuel Macron learned. So it has to be combined perhaps with the right redistribution or sweetener so that the poor people aren't bearing most of the cost of a carbon tax. So maybe it is still possible. if the carbon pricing is combined with reductions in taxes elsewhere or compensation. But I think the biggest source of solution is technology. That if technologies were developed, nuclear, fourth generation nuclear being one of them, but not the only one, that makes clean energy cheaper than dirty energy, then that solves the game theoretic problem. It solves the collective action problem. Everyone doing what's best for them also does what's best for the planet. Now, we're not there yet. Fossil fuels are cheaper than the alternatives, but if that switches, and that's going to be a technological solution, then it would solve that collective action problem, and collective rationality and individual rationality would coincide.
So I ask you now one last question from the internet, so to speak, and then I look up here and collect, so to speak, your arms when you have questions. Because the most popular, by far, question was, will AI guide our decisions towards more rational ones, or will it simply learn irrationality from the people?
Yes. Well, it's a good question, and I think it is triggered by the fact that what people think of as artificial intelligence today is just one kind of artificial intelligence, namely so-called deep learning, which consists of extracting statistical patterns from massive amounts of human-generated content, from the internet and Wikipedia and Reddit and Facebook posts and just everything that's out there on the internet. Now, that has turned out to be surprisingly powerful, more powerful than many of us would have guessed, but it is not necessarily the same as intelligence, because it's, for one thing, it does reproduce some of the biases that humans have generated in all that content. And for another, there's no actual knowledge in the sense of factual propositions. That is, commitments. A did X to B at time T in place XYZ. A fact with specific individuals and times and places just isn't in these models. It's just not the way they work. That's a different style of artificial intelligence that went out of fashion because there was so much information on the web. Graphic processing units got so powerful that you could train these models in ways that was impossible before. And so people started to equate artificial intelligence with deep learning, that is, extracting statistical patterns. But we know that this kind of artificial intelligence is vulnerable to hallucinations. It makes stuff up. If any of you have ever tried it, occasionally I will look up my own biography. I'll ask ChatGPT, and about 75% of it is correct. And about 25% of it sounds plausible, but it's just wrong. I mean, just for example, it'll say, I'm the child of immigrants. Now, my parents were born in Canada, and I was born in Canada. My grandparents were immigrants, but it's, parents, grandparents, what's the difference? They kind of go together, don't they? That's a problem with GPT and the other forms of what people call artificial intelligence. So I do think, I have argued this, and my former collaborator and student Gary Marcus has argued this, and others have, that we need to get real artificial intelligence. There has to be both the ability to process statistical patterns, but also the ability to represent facts, propositions, statements that we can actually look at, we from the outside, and see, are they true or false? With a promise of more intelligent artificial intelligence, I think there is enormous potential for there to be an increase in rationality, simply because the human mind, as some of those examples showed, is limited in its ability to process lots of statistical information. So I go to my doctor, I have some symptoms, I have a medical history, I have my genome, 3 billion base pairs, I have my unique history of metabolism and epigenetics. I belong to an ethnic group. My condition might come from any of 25 different diseases, each one of which has a huge literature in the medical literature. Is my doctor supposed to be able to understand all of that? Like my genome and my symptoms and my history and the medical literature? It's kind of crazy to think that any human being can give good medical advice based on something that is clearly superhuman. That's an example of how artificial intelligence, I think, could have massive advantages because it is a way in which it could augment human rationality.
Okay, thank you. Now the floor is open. There's a question up there. The man with the hat.
No.
You get a microphone. It's just coming. Just look to your left. It should work.
Right. I'd like to test you on this. I mean, see if you agree or not, or whether I'm identifying a certain contradiction in your thought here, which is to say, on the one hand, you say, and I think quite rightly, that the universe has no purpose. It is not created by a divine lawgiver. Now, under the aspect of science, of course, the universe is not teleological. It has no purpose, no goals, no nothing. But then comes the problem, how do you explain human minds and the fact that humans do have goals and that goals exist? Wouldn't that suggest that dualism, which I think you disparaged as a thing you cannot believe anymore due to recent scientific advancements, that dualism is actually right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that word. What is the thing that you
Dualism.
What?
Dualism.
Oh, dualism.
Dualism, yes.
Okay, yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
my Swiss accent, I suppose.
No, it's my hearing.
Yes, so I hope you
Yeah.
get what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we do have an understanding of goal-directed systems. This is basically what used to be called cybernetics, the theory of Norbert Weiner and others, that when you have a system with a negative feedback loop, it can be described as a goal-seeking system. As with Romeo and Juliet, we humans can have a goal. We can have a knowledge of a set of actions that can reduce the difference between our current state and the goal state. When we implement those actions, we are goal-seeking systems. There can be others. It's often said that the process of natural selection, people put it in quotation marks, but it's as if there was engineering design in the evolution of bodies, probably because, again, there's a feedback system where there are variations and the environment then selects, and then that is cycled. So one can characterize a system that can be said to have purposes. Robots would be yet another example. Homeostasis within a body can be described as a goal-seeking system. A thermostat, the governor of an engine, cruise control on your car. And one could therefore say that it is possible for the blind and non-teleological process of chemistry can give rise to replicators, which then give rise to the process of natural selection, which, because it involves feedback, is itself can be described as a kind of teleological mechanism. That is, it's as if organisms seek to maximize reproduction. One of those products is the human brain, and one of the products of the human brain is thermostats and computers and robots and so on. So that would be a story of how goal-seeking mechanisms can arise out of a universe that has no goals. And the crucial step is the emergence of replicators. That's what I think marks the transition between a system, namely the universe with no goals whatsoever, and the first mechanisms that you could call cybernetic or goal-seeking.
There's a question over there.
There we go. In your presentation, you basically equated religion and conspiracy theories as irrational. If we rely solely on rationalism and scientism, which are obviously limited, how do we define the meaning of life without religion? Thank you.
So, so I wouldn't equate religion with conspiracy theories, but what I think they have in common is a willingness to embrace beliefs without a commitment to demonstrating that they are true. That is a kind of faith. I don't think that religions are at all necessary to define the meaning of life, and many of the meanings of life that religion gives us, I think, on scrutiny are not particularly meaningful. We lost the, can you still hear me? Okay. I do discuss in Rationality how a moral commitment to human well-being, while not technically rational or logical, and David Hume made the point that you can't, strictly speaking, ground morality in pure rationality. But if you combine rationality with self-interest, which, by the way, Hume also said is not, strictly speaking, rational. There's no rational reason for me to want to be in comfort rather than pain or health rather than sickness. Okay, even if you believe that, let's just take it as a brute fact that I do. I really do want to be happy and comfortable and healthy rather than sick and painful and hungry. So we'll just grant that as part of what it means to be an organism that evolved by natural selection. Not rational, but it's the way we are. And we're social. That is, our well-being, whether we're hungry or fed, sick or healthy, happy or not, depends on what other people do. And we want to influence them. Now, if you combine those two things, then it becomes very hard to defend any kind of action that I would have trouble defending, any action that would privilege me at the expense of you and hope for you to take it seriously. Like, why should you care that it's me and not you? Any system that I advocate, that I hope for you to embrace, has to treat us symmetrically. Just as I can't say that the place that I'm sitting is a special holy place in the universe because I just happen to be sitting on it right now. You wouldn't take that seriously. Likewise, you wouldn't take seriously any set of rules or guidelines for living that would say, I get everything and you get nothing, or my pain matters and your pain doesn't. Now, once you have that, you do have a basis for morality, you have a basis for humanism, for indeed progress in the sense of enhancing the well-being, the equality, the lives of people. That's pretty meaningful. That's pretty moral. So I argue in the book that you don't have to believe that Jesus died on the cross. You don't have to believe that you can't mix milk and meat. You don't have to accept this guy as a prophet or that scripture as sacred in order to lead a moral life, the moral life being that you treat other people's interests as valuable as you treat your own interests.
Okay, there's a final question here.
Sam Harris arguably gets much more hate than you do online. And
say it again. Oh,
Sam Harris gets...
Sam Harris, yes.
Yeah, he arguably gets much more fire and hate than you do, while presumably advocating for the same values of the Enlightenment. There's some non-overlap between you and him, to the best of my knowledge. But what is the lesson that the rest of the people who believe in the Enlightenment values, can derive from your ability to navigate the waters of the current cancel culture?
Yes, it's a good question, and of course Sam Harris advocates many of the same ideas that I do, and vice versa. But he does get a lot more hate, and I don't know exactly why. Some of it may be that he just says more things more often, and more that are more easy for people to get. I'll write a book every couple of years. He has I don't know, every week or twice a week. So just more stuff out there, it's more prominent. He's, I think, more willing to take on certain controversies, hot buttons, topics that get people, that arouse a reaction in people. I think I might be a little more, maybe because I'm Canadian, I'm a little more tactful, reticent, sometimes euphemistic. But I admire his honesty and his courage, and he sometimes pays for it in hateful remarks. But I'm glad that he's out there saying what he's saying.
Okay, there's the really final question now.
Thanks a lot for your talk. You demonstrated how a lot of irrationality can be explained by people's political leaning more than by them being dumb. And I wonder, how will promoting norms and evidence and rationality, teaching, so to speak, then have an effect if so much of what people believe is actually politics rather than knowledge or rationality?
Yeah, it's a profound question, and I don't have an answer as to how to divert people from this fallacy. I think that noting that it is a problem, and that is happening more and more. Certainly, you have a lot of discussions of polarization, of intolerance as a problem, especially in the United States. So I think that will help. I think there have to be promotion of arenas, norms, games, rules that are more objective and less tied to tribalism, such as prediction markets, where if you were to have political commentators, even politicians, make predictions, is inflation going to go up or down in a year? And in a year, well, let's go back and see who's right, who's wrong. That incentivizes people to get it right rather than to rally the troops around the cause. It has to happen on many fronts at once. I think institutions have to try not to follow the temptation of issuing statements that brand them as having a particular political affiliation or allegiance. Universities should stop making official statements. Scientific journals should stop making, commenting on political events so as they preserve a reputation for objectivity. I think in debates, say within science, there should be more adversarial collaborations. That is, two scientists with different views sit down together and agree on an empirical test that would show who's right and who's wrong, then do the test and see what happens. So these norms of avoiding partisanship, tribalism, my-sidism have to kind of proliferate in many directions through the culture. I can't think of any single way to make it happen. But thanks for the very good question.
This was a very good final statement, Stephen. Thank you very much for this inspiring and thought-provoking lecture. And thank all of you for joining us today. Give Steve another applause.